So let's start by considering the meeting minutes from December. Does anyone have any comments on the meeting minutes? Is there a motion to approve? Second? All in favor? And any opposed? Okay, the meeting.
I abstained because I wasn't here.
Oh, thank you. Right. So with that, the meeting minutes are approved, and Alex, I'll give you a minute to catch up with that. Okay. All right, thank you. And thank you, Alex, again, for your excellent minutes. They really help. They're really very detailed and careful. So thank you.
Somebody will read that. There, when they do.
That's great. Okay, so the next topic that I want to go through is to spend time with each person going around and sharing what they prepared for our key topics. And again, for this meeting, we're just focused on the greenhouse gas mitigation topics. And what we all prepared was some background about the topic and then some key recommendations. And some folks had additional elements, which are great in terms of stakeholders, resources, other things like that, all really helpful. I think my goal for right now is to go around, give each person or each topic, I should say, because some of them were shared topics, but each topic have 6 topics. So about a little less than 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes to go around, just, give a high level overview of your recommendations, any questions that you had as you came up with it. One thing I'd like you to think about, and maybe you want to speak to, is who are your recommendations geared towards? In some cases, they're recommendations for the town. In some cases, they're recommendations for individuals or maybe somebody else. So it might be helpful if you can comment on who your recommendations are for. The other thing that it might be helpful if you just give a little thought about is, as you were preparing this, do you feel like you know who you would take this to next to get feedback on your recommendations? So we had talked about the next stage of this was being, talking with other experts. That could be people in town, that could be a nonprofit, that could be, someone from another town or a knowledgeable person. So do you have ideas about who you might go to? If you don't, that might be a good time to bring this up so we can share ideas with each other and help each other out. So that's sort of what I'm hoping to accomplish. Does that make sense for this next half hour or so? Any questions about that? Okay. So with that, I was thinking maybe we could just go in order of greenhouse gas impact, which would be starting with you. All right. Are you okay with that?
Sure.
All right.
Sure. So for transportation is, a huge piece. We have so much control because we have a highway that goes around the town. We have state highways that cut through. So as I can tell you maybe a little bit of my process is, and thanks to people who gave me some feedback on, coming up with this list. I looked at some other towns' plans and I looked at the pathways reduction strategies that came from it's like the draft from our consultants. And so I looked at that and I looked at the other, the towns and I, it's like, what can we as a committee and a town do that's not already being done? That might influence people to take, public transit or bike or walk. And I feel like we need more information on why people aren't using these resources or engaging in these activities. So I wrote my goals. I kind of reworked what the goals were from other towns and I made them like super aspirational, which I thought might get more buy-in. So the first one, build, connect, and interconnect the transportation system in Milton that makes it easy, convenient, and safe for children and adults to use alternate modes of transportation. So this includes, you know, all the strategies around like, well, provide bike racks, so people have a safe place to store their bikes and, you know, bike lanes and yeah, just carpooling apps and all of these different things. But I really am interested, well, why, I mean, people have heard a lot of this before, so how is this gonna be different? So I feel like we really need more information on that. You know, why aren't they taking advantage? How come people in Milton don't take the bus? Bus goes right by my house, I take it to get to Ashmont. People could take it to get to school here and there. So the first one.
Got one more minute.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. The second goal is about EV charging. So create a more sustainable future through the adoption of transit-oriented development and mixed-use zoning. Oh, excuse me, the last one's more about EV. So this one's more about like the stretch codes and the smart codes and the, you know, I know it's a hot issue, but certainly the MBTA communities law is designed to create a more sustainable transportation network. And then the last one is, you know, building for a future that will depend on EV infrastructure. And so this includes residences, commercial opportunities, and then what we as a town are doing internally. And then I listed a bunch of stakeholders from the list that I thought might apply and opened it. Any other suggestions?
Awesome, thank you. So we could talk about each thing as we go, but I'm gonna suggest we go all the way around and then have a dialogue back and forth, so we make sure to get through every topic. So let's just go on for now, and make a note if you had any questions for Lisa. So next we'll go to buildings, and I think, Alex, since you have had a chance to talk about residential buildings before, maybe let's go to the commercial buildings, Mary, if you don't mind, and speak to that.
Yes, definitely. So municipal and commercial buildings are the second largest contributor to the Massachusetts greenhouse. And I had exciting on the bottom of it, but I didn't, look at that. Anyways, in terms of, obviously in town, we have town-owned facilities, and then we have always private universities, we have hospitals, and then a lot of, commercial real estate. We work with those quite a bit in my role right now. So I gave some recommendations in terms of how we approach municipal and commercial buildings. Biggest one is energy efficiency measures. There's a lot of rebates, incentives in Massachusetts that people aren't picking up. It's a lot of work. And so they usually try to hire a rebate an administration group to do that, to actually receive the dollars. That's the biggest hurdle in terms of doing that. But as folks know, HVAC, lighting, the building envelope itself, there's a lot of work now in terms of some incentives to obviously improve that, become more efficient, utilizing a lot of data and analytics on those. So with that said, you don't need to like gut out the building. There's a lot of little data loggers that you can put throughout your existing system to help you achieve more efficiencies across your processing building. So a lot of emerging technologies there. Renewables, you know, similar to residential, I would say it's one of the largest ways that people can, commercial and municipal can obviously achieve reducing their emissions. Obviously, rooftop solar is probably the best, but then folks obviously purchase renewable products from a supplier. And that can be renewable energy certificates. They can do PPAs. We have a lot of folks that do community solar. We also have, depending on where you live, if there's a nuclear generation asset, it's actually environmental attributes that you can tie to your facility as well. And the last recommendation I have is building management technology. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of state-of-the-art sensors, data loggers. They don't cost a lot. They literally tag right into the existing metering system, and they can definitely provide signals, not only in terms of how to reduce energy, but also they can signal if there's a problem with the equipment. So there's a lot of ways that buildings can achieve different efficiencies and more optimization, you know, with different pathways.
Thank you. And can you just make a comment a little bit? It sounds like these recommendations are for like building owners, is that?
Building holders, facilities management. So probably like, I know when I mentioned this to some of them, like Curry College, and I think the town of Massachusetts is in an aggregation with power options. Yeah, so they will go on and do like an aggregate. So usually they're a member, and they can purchase their supply, their renewables and power options. So I know very, very well. They have ways that you can do electrification, other pathways, and, well, that's your supplier to them, the company I work for. But you can, it would be definitely the facilities and obviously those that are managing kind of the goals and objectives, sustainability.
And the next?
Yes, so, in an effort to keep it sort of focused and, I'll just read through the kind of the town level action. I think last time we talked a little more about the kinds of behaviors we want to, influence in private homes and, and residents. But at the town level, the top of my list is creating a climate action director position in town staff. And that's not really specific to buildings, but I think if we're gonna do the things on the buildings list, you need somebody whose job it is to oversee these things and not sort of side of desk. Second, I think we should adopt the opt-in specialized building code, which is a layer on top of the current stretch code that encourages pre-wiring for electrification. We have a whole agenda item on that, so we'll go over quickly. And then, Mary referenced the difficulty of accessing incentives and the sort of complexity of adopting renewable energy and energy efficient technology. That's true for commercial and sort of professional building managers, doubly so for private residents. Other towns are launching electrification programs that assist residents in being successful with those projects, both accessing the incentives and rebates that are available, vetting contractors and helping people select good quotes and ultimately be successful. So an electrification program is the third item, and then fourth, I think the CEA program is already coming up for renewal this year. I think the power purchase contracts are happening later in the year, and then we'll go on to a new program in November. Currently, the default tier has 10% additional green energy, and that's the one that people are opted into by default. And the vast majority of Milton residents are on that program. Other towns are slowly ramping that number up to kind of accelerate the town's progress towards 100% renewable energy. I think how much you ramp that up is something that we could look at in more detail. I said 20%. If it was 25%, and with the state portfolio standard next year, I think if you added those two things together, people would be at more than half renewable energy, which would be kind of cool. But so that's the fourth thing.
Thank you. Okay. I wonder, Arthur, since we haven't had a chance to hear from you yet about waste, would you take waste next?
Sure, happy to. An interesting area, fascinating one, as a matter of fact, and I wanted to say, as in response to your query, that maybe our first step is to have a meeting on this with the director of the Department of Public Works. That would probably be wise from our having an understanding of existing operations. And Jack has his thumb on that very nicely for us. And he's, by the way, a tremendous resource, both internally and externally. He's very, very well networked. And then address, as you'll see in the goals, an education program and getting input from the community, particularly with respect to what a sense of the community's elasticity will be in terms of making change for the future. There's been some recent research findings in the nation on climate action planning It's involving 19 major cities or counties throughout the United States, along with Toronto, Canada. And what's interesting is that out of that research was the conclusion that there's no one waste solution, that it has to be generally very specific to the community or to the county or to the state, depending upon the entity that you're working with, based upon the resources it has. And those aren't only financial resources, but also staff resources and the geographic resources within which the community can work. But there is the opportunity for a combination of material resource reduction, materials reuse. Jack's going to make a couple of comments on that for us. Recycling, organic management, waste and energy recovery, and landfill management. They all together can contribute to a solution. Nationally, solid waste as a sector, as of 2021, emits approximately 3% of greenhouse gas. However, when you follow the chain backwards relative to the production of all of the products that go into waste, it represents about 12%. So we have to look at it multidimensionally. It's not just what we're putting in our blue bins in the town of Milton. It's what it takes to produce and transport all of what goes into that. So our recommendations to engage in public education and outreach initiatives that focus on the importance for waste reduction in management, to develop, communicate, and implement an infrastructure to support a range of waste control and reuse practices, define metrics for determining the effects of waste management practices, including the financial costs and economies involved for those practices, such as the percentages of waste going to landfills and to incinerators, as well as to other possibilities. Explore possibilities for collecting food waste separately, as approximately 25% of Massachusetts solid waste is food. And that's a contaminant that can hurt performance audits and drive up costs for our communities. Identify and apply for grants that support new and ongoing solid waste and recycling infrastructures needed to reduce climate pollution, and investigate waste diversion programs for different types of products, such as furniture, textiles, footwear, and so on down the line. And working with one of the other sources, this is sort of morbid, but they use furniture and recycle furniture, and they collect it, particularly beds, wooden bed frames. And there's a firm in New Hampshire that's Green Caskets, and they recycle all of the furniture and make caskets out of it, and then export them all over the country.
It's great.
Jack, did you want to add a couple of comments?
No, I think you summarized it pretty well. I can, I had a little presentation I could do later.
Yeah, is that the presentation related to the materials reuse forum?
Yes,
Perfect.
yes.
We have time for that on the agenda later.
Cool.
Great, thank you so much. That's great. Okay, I'm gonna go over the fugitive emissions really quickly, and then I'll turn it over to you, Ron, and for conservation, I don't know, Maggie, if you weighed in on that, so.
No, it's all wrong.
Okay, very good. So in terms of the fugitive emissions, find the sheet here. There we go. Great. So the thing about fugitive emissions, and we're really talking about leaks from gas pipes in town. That's what I focused on, because that's really the source of fugitive emissions. I mean, there could be leaks from refrigerators, from heat pumps and so on, and that could be another area of focus. But for now, I'm just focused on leaks from gas pipes, which I believe is what's represented in an inventory, which is 3% of the greenhouse gas emissions in Milton. So the thing that's interesting about gas leaks is there's really only one entity that can fix them, and that's National Grid. So it's because they own the gas pipes and stuff. So it's all about how do we interact with the utility to get them to fix the pipes. And they are working within a regulatory structure that, controls how they do their investment, that has requirements for how fast they need to fix, it's all very, very regulated, which is good in a way because it, gives us a structure in which to work. And I don't know if any of you have called in a gas leak. I have a number of times. I've been walking my dog and I smell the gas and I call the company and they come out right away. There's no question. They will come out if there's a gas leak. They have to. So, anyway, I could go on about this. I think it's a very interesting topic and there's a lot of data from a nonprofit called Heat that publishes a map of gas leaks. There's many, many in town. Some of them have been leaking for many, many years. If they're small, the gas company isn't required to fix them very quickly. So to me, the main thing is to figure out how to get gas leaks reported so that they can be fixed, to update the maps and, and advocate for the utility to repair the gas leaks. So the recommendations that I have are increased public awareness of the gas leaks and how to report them and why it matters, publicize the maps from the nonprofit I mentioned, to make people more aware of this issue. And then to track planned gas leak repairs through the National Grid. It's their gas system enhancement plans, which are filed with the DPU, and advocate for accelerated leak repairs. So that's all I have. I'll be happy to answer questions later, but Ron, why don't we turn it to you for conservation?
Okay, very briefly, with apologies to Maggie, because she and I have not had a chance to really
Yeah,
connect on.
no apologize, you needed.
Alright, so, so this focuses mostly on the Blue Hills Reservation area, 7,000 acres of wooded areas and trails, and the Neponset River Valley composed of 120 square miles. Now, much of the land on both of these areas extends beyond Milton, but we're just going to focus on the Milton part. Although these are both precious jewels in our town, and there's been a great deal of emphasis on preserving and protecting them, practically little or nothing is known about the climate impact of these resources. As most of you know, a wooded forest is a great source of sequestration for CO2. And there's also a potential scourge in terms of fires and other things that can happen that can cause a great adaptation response. So what we're recommending is an effort to develop the overall capacity to monitor and respond to the climate impact of Milton conservation land in the Blue Hills and the Neponset River watershed. And we're suggesting that a way forward on this is first to develop and draft a climate survey, of these two areas to determine the amount of carbon sequestration and emissions that are related to them. And probably we would need a small amount of grant funding to do that. And then that would lead to the design and implementation of a climate conservation plan for these two areas that would contribute to the overall mitigation efforts of our committee. We've identified a list of stakeholders, including Conservation Commission that Arthur mentioned 2 meetings ago, that we intend to consult with about this. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. What a great array of issues. This is wonderful to sort of hear the broad overview. So we have about 10 minutes for discussion. I want to open it up for any questions or comments that people have. And as we discuss this, I would encourage us to think about sort of the next step. And we will be talking about our community expert and engagement plan next. But in general, what we've talked about is now that we have these draft recommendations in hand, we're gonna go and talk with experts about it next. And like I said, those experts could be in town, out of town, a lot of different things. But so as we discuss these recommendations now, think about, do you have, or do you think your fellow committee members have enough information to start shopping this around and taking these recommendations to other people to get feedback? Because they don't need to be perfect right now. These recommendations are just a starting point, but is it enough to start a conversation? And do you know who you might talk to? Or do you need help with that? So with that, I'll throw the floor open and see if people have questions or comments.
To give a couple of municipal staff comments on some potential resources that either we have or will have shortly. The Apex work that we're doing through the greenhouse gas inventory grant includes pathways, sort of strategies that they are working on quantifying. The unquantified lists is mostly finalized, and I got.
We've got this on the agenda
Yeah,
later,
oh, okay,
so we'll have time to.
okay, so that is available. One other part of their work is doing these reduction pathways that includes, Ron, the carbon sequestration potential for green space in town, including conservation land. So that will also be mapped and may be enough for what your recommendation is, or maybe a good jumping off
What's the
point.
timing on?
We're getting an update next Thursday, and hopefully we'll have some pretty fun docs after that.
Oh, okay.
I have my notes. Lisa, did you take a look at the bicycle and pedestrian master plan that the town adopted?
Not recently, but I feel like it was on my radar this year.
It may provide you with the sort of details on which roads to prioritize and which sort of traffic calming measures, you might want to recommend in sort of concert with, because that's, focused on the many benefits of pedestrian bicycle infrastructure, but could stand to be sort of focused in on how it could tie into climate resilience. And Mary, our microgrid project, the feasibility analysis should be being presented at a public forum in early first 2 weeks of February. I think it should be useful forum. I'll share the information out with you all and with Single Milton. Lauren and I have been in contact for the newsletters, but I think a lot of the work that comes out of that might be good in informing how particular municipal buildings could be tied into that one.
Thank you. I have a question. So well, 2 questions. One is the work we're doing kind of like a whole separate process from what Apex is doing? Like, aren't they coming up with goals? Like, are we both coming up with goals? Are we gonna merge them? Like, what's the process?
They're providing a recommendation that on a scope of work that was developed before this committee
Right.
existed. That scope of work was, for me, a bit of a safe hatch in case the work that you were all doing didn't move at the rapid pace that you're going at, which is wonderful, or didn't move forward at all. So I think it should be helpful, and primarily it's meant to do data quantification. So a lot of the recommendations are highly similar, and they will be able to be professionally quantified in terms of how many cars need to be electric on the road by our 2030 goals and the 2050 goals.
Right.
So I think parallel, and at the end of the day, they give us a professional recommendation and you guys make the decision.
Got it. Then my second question is, there's so much overlap in what we're recommending and what other entities are doing, right? Like, there's the transportation plan, there's the conservation committee, there's, what Mass Save is doing, and I'm just like, I'm trying to understand, like, what's our lane? And, and are we just supposed to kind of group everything together? It feels like a little daunting to just be like, we should do this, when there's maybe a whole nother committee doing just that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think part of the plan can be, you know, this work that's happening over here on this other committee is also climate work and is incorporated in our plan by reference, right? Doesn't mean that we're gonna do it. It's like, good, it's happening. It should doubly happen because it's part of the climate plan too. But then at some point, I think having put it all together and kind of looked at who's doing what, we'll see the things that are not gonna happen unless we do it.
Yeah.
The master plan, for instance, has 120 discrete strategies for master planning, and each of those has a specific lead agency, effectively. The master plan implementation committee cannot do all 120 of those things on their own. But they've identified a facilities director to do X projects, or establishing a community preservation committee to do that kind of work. So I think it's more in the vein of the kind of comprehensive planning work that the master plan committee does, rather than being like, you have to step on everybody's toes and do everything, because climate is inextricable from every part of the world.
And I think we have to remember that we're an appointed committee. So, we always have to keep in mind all the other residents in town. And so, I think public outreach is huge because, we don't have anybody from the public coming. I think I didn't come last month, but the month before, I think there were 2 people. So majority of the residents have no idea what's going on. So, I think, moving in baby steps is always good. Because, I found out it just, no one knows anything until it's like going to affect them. So I don't think, we should move too quickly and until we have, multiple public forums.
That is what we're gonna
Yeah.
talk about next with the
Yeah.
community engagement, and so we'll talk about exactly what we wanna do with that, but it's a really important part of our charge to put that engagement out there, and I think it does relate to your point, Lisa, because I don't think anything that we're coming up with here is gonna be like something nobody's ever thought of before. It's like what a lot of people are either already working on or have identified need to be done. So part of it is, like, to me, is just as Alex said, pulling it all together and saying, yep, there's that piece over here and that piece over here, and they all relate. And then it's the community engagement to say, we need to tell people about this. We need to get people's feedback and especially their buy-in, so that, when we come out with a plan, it's something that the community can be like, yeah, that's our plan and we're gonna work on it.
It's the other thing to make it clear, so that when what we might recommend, because we can't do anything, right? We're just here to advise elected officials. And they can take it or leave it, right? So if it's not clear, it's not like, resonant and actionable, then, the public engagement won't work, because it'll just be like, what are they talking about? None of this applies to me. So I think if we get to that sort of level of clarity, then I think that engagement will happen more.
Yeah, because back to the bike plan, I know that, my neighborhood had a problem with the bike plan. So no one ever told really anybody that the bike plan was being created. And so, when I asked Tim, the planner, he did come to our neighborhood association, and we have a very active neighborhood association. And so my neighborhood raised concerns with the bike plan, because it included making streets into our neighborhood one way, and we've worked so hard with our public safety, to make sure that we have access to police and fire. It also included, increasing impervious surfaces in the Blue Hills. And, so our neighborhood sent in recommendations and we wanted it to be changed, but they weren't changed. And so we were, guaranteed that it was going to, if it started getting to be implemented, that would affect our neighborhood in the Blue Hills. then we would be notified. So even though the bike plan is written, we've been guaranteed that it's really not written in stone. So we just have to be careful because it wasn't, most people don't know anything about the bike plan. So I don't want that to happen with this either, because then we're having a discussion all over again. So we've done all this work, then all of a sudden the neighborhood is made aware, and then we have to, go back and redo the work again.
Well, I sort of wonder if the lesson from that isn't to get to the point where you're bringing specific things forward for a real vote and decision sooner rather than later, because you could spend years trying to do public outreach, but like you said, until it's affecting people, 99% of people are tuned out.
Yeah.
Right, so better to like bring it forward in a way where it will affect folks, but maybe so that it's not such a, so that when they do show up and care, now you can really have a conversation instead of, well, we already finished this process,
Yeah.
we've been working on it for years, where were you?
Yeah, and I like how it's broken down, because I think if you do a community outreach on your topics, I think it's in bite-sized pieces
Mhm.
that, if you're talking about grants that are available for the homeowner, I think people, would really respond to that positively,
Yeah.
instead of waiting through a whole entire meeting. So maybe breaking it down into bite-sized pieces.
I agree.
Basically, I think you were asking about dialogues.
Yeah.
And they're an imperative.
Mhm.
Reinforcing what's been discussed in the last couple of minutes. If we don't do this next year, climate action planning in Milton will be where it was last year, and it wasn't. Which brings us to the recommendations from the committee overall to the select board, and that is the reappointment process extension, really the extension or continuation of the Climate Action Planning Committee. Everybody, I think, on the committee has been appointed for a one-year term. And then see whether or not there's any sense of what this committee would recommend in terms of what terms of service really ought to be. Sure, you want to have some new people come on, but you also want to keep the history, so that there's a mix of both occurring simultaneously. It would seem climate action planning has to become an integral part of strategic planning for the town of Milton. So we might ask the select board where they are in that process and where climate action planning could fit from their perspective, or ask them, or give them a recommendation of do both. Josh has mentioned the master plan implementation committee. That's about to sunset, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So what other plans, if any, for its continuation? And if it's to be reconstituted and extended, would this topic be an integral part of this? Because if you go back, like we did with the school planning 20 years ago, nothing in terms of energy, emissions, et cetera, was in that plan. Any plan that would be done today ought to be inclusive of elements of this nature. And do we want to have a recommendation that any plan that's put forward at any level within the town of Milton cannot omit? So there can't be sins of omission as well as sins of commission.
That's great.
I don't know if anyone in this room was invited by MPIC when they were discussing their climate updates, but there's going to be an update to the master plan. The likely be in the form of an addendum. And they invited Tucker Smith at least, and I believe
Yeah,
Laura, on advice for how to advance sustainability goals in that addendum. So certainly something MPIC is aware of, and has highlighted early on in their sort of review process that's been their focus over the last 18 months. And there'll be a warrant probably in the fall. What that MPIC will look like.
Would there be at some point in time sense to having the two committees meeting?
Yes,
Are they on our
Up to the
agenda, or
committees.
we on their agenda, one way or the other? We're talking about dialogues. They begin at a fundamental level.
Yes, this brings us so nicely to the next topic on the agenda, so I'm gonna move us along. And the next topic is the community expert, and engagement plan. And so part of this is holding meetings with the public and with other partners in town. That's phase 2. Phase 1 is, to refine the recommendation. So this is the plan that I'm referring to. It's the one-page document. What I'm hoping we can do is to see if we want to make any changes to this plan, highlight anything. I do want to make sure, so you'll see on here that February through March, which is coming up very soon, is to discuss our draft recommendations with experts or small groups of stakeholders. And I give a list of, or, this document provides a list of possible people that we might collaborate with. So I want to make sure that we're ready to do that starting in whatever it is, like a couple weeks. So if anybody has concerns about that, let's talk about it now. And then let's talk about whether this plan looks like the right plan, or if we need to make any changes. And I think, everything that folks have been saying in terms of engaging with other committees, engaging with neighborhood associations, all of that is really a central, part of this plan and is necessary. So with that, let me just open it up and see if there's comments or questions.
What's the timing of the article? So in terms of like specific to buildings, it would be nice just to do an introduction that we are here and want to explore kind of. It sounds like I know the municipals already have a plan in place, but the private businesses or whatnot, universities, doing a little bit of an outreach to connect to see what kind of activities they've done.
You asked about an article. Are you
Yeah.
referring to the Milton Times article? So, yeah, so that was an idea we talked about last time, and I put it on the
Right.
plan. Haven't actually reached out to Milton Times yet, so that's, if we all agree that this is the right plan, then I think we could easily reach out, have them come to our next meeting, and then they could write an article potentially.
To do outreach, though, just external outreach, like it's probably like an intro kind of, this is who we are, this is what we're trying to achieve, right? And then reach out to some of the experts.
Yeah, so I was thinking this could happen simultaneously. So
Yes.
I think we talked about last time, I can't remember whose idea it was, but somebody had the good idea that we need sort of a general orientation. Like there was a Milton Times article that happened last summer that sort of said, oh, here it is, in last July, the Climate Action Planning Committee takes first steps. So that was when we were first convening. So this would be a good time to have an article that says, here's what the Climate Action Plan is doing, here's what it is, here's what they're working on. That probably wouldn't come out, if say someone from the Milton Times comes to our February meeting, that would be the 3rd week of February, probably that article wouldn't come out until March. So,
Yeah.
I'm not thinking we wait until that article to go out and talk with other people. Like, let's go have those conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tracy, should we not, all the select board reports at 6-month intervals?
We
And,
did provide them a report in December, and we'll do one.
right, and maybe we could tie the newspaper into that process and information so that it's knit together.
Like give the newspaper the progress report and sort of help, that would provide some background for them, or how are you thinking tying it together?
I haven't thought that through that
Yeah.
far yet, but
Okay,
Or have the article come out the week before the selectmen's meeting. So then if anybody has questions, they could go to the selectmen's meeting during citizen speak.
okay.
or the other way around, but I'm sorry, I'll go ahead.
Just, I think repetition is valuable, so maybe it might be worth a conversation with the Milton Times about what regular coverage level would be feasible, even if it's just like a small update that we mostly write for them, they extracted from the minutes. Things about what was discussed this last month, just so that it's sort of entering people's consciousness repeatedly.
I also want to say with the Milton Access TV, I've actually done a couple like sustainability videos with them. And they've definitely expressed interest in doing a video about this committee and the work that we're doing and hope to do. So that's another option as well.
So in terms of the conservation piece, I'd like to wait at least a week to get the apex data to see if that affects this, and also to meet with Maggie if we can somehow connect things. And then the other point I wanted to make is that I think there's actually like a three-step process instead of a two-step process, at least from my way of thinking. There is step one, engaging the supportive stakeholders for our recommendations. There's step two, engaging in neighborhood dialogues about what we're doing to get feedback from them. And then there's step three, which is maybe one of the most important things we can do, which is awareness raising about our goals or about what we recommend for the town, so that part of our work, elevates this is kind of vague, but it elevates the consciousness of people about the degree to which climate affects their own lives.
I think you bring up a good point, and I just kind of want to point this out on the plan. So, and that's the goal of each phase of the outreach, right? So what I've described here is the goal of the first phase of the outreach is to refine our recommendations, to get expert feedback, right? And at the same time with the Milton Times articles, to raise general public awareness of that the committee exists, that we are a thing. But phase two has a lot of possible goals. So in terms of broader community outreach, I think we've talked about these in different times. So one is raising awareness of the CAP committee and raising interest in the CAP committee. One is gathering community input on priorities. Like we've sort of picked these priorities based on the emissions inventory. Other towns are, doing community surveys about their priorities. So there may be some things where the community has priorities that aren't necessarily based on the inventory, and we might want to hear that. There's gathering community feedback on the draft recommendations. I think that's important, obviously. There's gathering information that might help with implementation, like, how many people have EVs? How many people are thinking about adopting heat pumps? How many people ride bicycles? Whatever, like that kind of concrete information. There's seeking volunteers who might be able to help us in the future. And then there's just developing general buy-in and foundation to support future implementation, which I think is getting to your awareness raising. There's probably other goals too, but I'd love to hear sort of what folks think about, like, do we want to be trying to do all of those things? We probably can in that second phase of outreach, or are some more important than others? Do you have thoughts about that?
I feel like we need help. I'm wondering, like, could I create my own email address related to my work on this committee and use rather than my private email, and then put it out there, social media, like, hey, I need volunteers to help me in this committee. Or am I breaking some rules? Like, if I have a subcommittee, what, open meeting rules apply if we're like doing the work of trying to, maybe develop a survey or, do the different outreach. Maybe someone could advise us, like, how do you hold a good public meeting and things like that. Do you know anyone? Like, are we breaking any rules?
I certainly hope not, because that's basically, I have a house at Sustainable Milton that I use to do stuff like that, and there's a bunch of people at Sustainable Milton who help. I think the difference is that they don't get to vote on the formal recommendations of this committee to the select board.
And you're also
Everybody in
appointed by
town
them.
is free to get engaged on climate issues in the town
Right,
and help out in figuring out what we ought to do.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say too, like I mentioned last time, we have a student at Milton High School, Kira, who has offered as part of her AP government class to draft a student survey. She's actually eager to get started, and I was gonna mention is planning to bring us a draft survey for our next meeting. So I think the more volunteers, the merrier, and I'm not aware of any rules that would prevent us
Okay.
from doing that, as, of course, they can't be on the committee, but, I think we should ask for help and advice wherever we can find it.
And I just think naturally, that engagement will come one specific issue at a time. You know, I can't remember who said it, because I agreed so thoroughly, I just remember now, like, we're not gonna be able to sit down and go to, a public meeting where we go over all 75 recommendations at one time and expect anybody to be able to walk afterwards.
And to your point about, the buildings in town, we're down a committee member. So we were supposed to have, someone from the Chamber of Commerce. So that member would have been the perfect liaison. So I.
And maybe that's the right issue to go out.
Yeah,
and
so
try to
that's
get
what I
them
was
involved.
going, I've tried, I'm a Chamber of Commerce member, and I've reached out to several members, but no one seems to have an interest. Not to put it on you, but the chamber meets once a month, so, and usually it's lunchtime, you get a free lunch at like at
Perfect timing. Yeah.
but if you wanted to engage.
Yes, I mean, that info.
Yeah, so unfortunately, that falls on you.
If you float the kind of code changes or like energy efficiency
Right.
Mm,
incentives, but once you make it a little more concrete, maybe there'd be more.
Yeah.
Right. Tangible.
Yeah, and especially, as I said, like I don't have any grants, so I've never gone for any grants as a business owner. And to me, it seems like it'd be a lot of work, so I've just sort of tuned it out. So giving like an easy way
Yeah.
would be really, I think, beneficial.
And couldn't the chamber, I mean, they can appoint someone. I'm not on the school committee, I'm
Yeah.
appointed by them, so if they're, imagine running a business and being on the chamber, you're busy,
Yeah,
but they could appoint someone,
Yeah.
or we could recommend someone that.
so I've been thinking that too, because there's a couple people, that I think have been good, but I haven't been to a chamber meeting, because again, it needs a new time. And, so, I can reach out to the president and see if Joe Parvecchio,
Oh, yeah, I know that.
Yeah. he's a really nice guy.
He is a very nice.
But he found somebody who could have been interested, but they lived out of town.
No.
So the chamber also involves like people from Quincy and our side too, so, that sort of caused a bit of a delay too.
I want to come back to the point that Alex said, that, is anybody gonna pay attention if we come up with a list of 72 recommendations? And do we want to do that? Or do we want to focus just on a few things that are more manageable and attainable? I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but it's a strategic question.
But just on your point, it's very common in strategic planning to have an overarching goal. And then below it, a number of reinforcing actions
Yeah,
for that. So you focus on, let's say, a half a dozen, 10 major impactive objectives. And then you have this, you can list underneath that, the actions that would support
yeah,
the delivery or implementation of those goals.
yeah.
So you don't have to have people faced with the issue that you're talking about.
Yeah, but I think that the job of the committee is to go from our 72 to our 10 within an overarching set of goals.
Agreed, that's exactly right.
Well, and I think too that, if we think about the different forums may lend themselves to different degrees of focus. So, if we're doing social media updates, we can have different posts about different topics and focusing on different things. Whereas if we're doing a broad overview at the public library, like, hey, come learn about our climate action plan, then maybe we'll want something higher level and more comprehensive. So it may vary depending on the outreach. And I get the sense that because this is such an important issue and such a complex issue, we're gonna keep coming back to it. We're about out of time on the agenda for talking about it today, so I would ask you to keep thinking about it. I for today, I want to make sure we're clear about what we're going to be doing in February and maybe March. So is everybody good with the idea that you're going to be reaching out to experts to talk about the particular topic that you worked on and get feedback? And John, I want to come to you because I know you didn't, you were working on, a mitigation, not mitigation, but adaptation topic. So I don't know if you want to jump in on one of these topics that we talked about today, or if you want to stay focused on the adaptation.
Well, I'll stay focused on adaptation, but I can also contribute, say, to transportation or other areas too.
Perfect. Transportation is the biggest, so I would say we can really use the help. So with that in mind, thank you for offering. Does everybody feel clear that you sort of know what to do between now and next month's meeting on the particular topic that we talked about today?
Yes,
Great.
talk next.
Talk to experts. Anybody want to,
And I just have one thing to add on that. No, I think, in an effort to just keep track of it all, and also to hold ourselves accountable to having a robust, public engagement, I think we should document the conversations we're having, just light documentation. I put together a really short one-page template with 3 questions, just like which action item did you discuss? What were the key questions and feedback, any other notes? That's it. I also made a Google form for it, but I don't really care whether you use the Google form or write it down on a napkin, as long as we keep them. Hopefully that makes sense to folks. I can circulate an example. I talked to John Keohane this morning about the specialized opt-in code, because he's, Hearst Rater involved in the process of actually building things under the code. So I figured talk to somebody who has some direct experience, so I wrote that conversation up and I can circulate that as an example.
Excellent. And I just want to throw out an idea for feedback for next meeting. I'm thinking that it may be most productive to come back and stay on these same topics rather than moving on to adaptation, which I do want to get to. Those are very important topics too, but I think it might help us keep the focus if we report back to each other. Here's what I heard, here's what I changed, here's what I realized I need to find out more about, and kind of revisit this round robin. Does that sound good for folks for next meeting? Okay, great. Well, thank you. That's great. We're going to move on to the next topic. And that is getting a staff update on pathways analysis, which we started to hear about a little bit. So I'm thinking this update may be faster, but Jack, can you give us a little overview of where things stand with the pathways analysis?
Yes. So yeah, as Josh was saying, right now we have the strategies, and they're working on quantifying that, and using the curve model, it's called, to calculate, the impacts of what the implementations of these strategies would mean to the greenhouse gas inventory. And I'm going to share real quick. I had shared just the strategies with Lisa about the transportation. So let me. And so this is still a draft, so that that's sort of why we've been not sharing it with you guys, just because it's not finished yet. But here's an example. We have the full screen. I don't know how to do full screen.
And Zoom option.
Yeah, I can zoom in.
There's the
Sorry.
plus in the bottom, right?
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have the different sectors broken down: energy and buildings, transportation, waste, governance and leadership, and then conservation and land use. And so we'll do transportation since we'll send it up to Lisa. We have the main goals, different strategies, and then actions. And the actions are going to be what unclear now what it's exactly going to look like. but the actions are going to be what they, put into the curve model to provide us with some concrete impacts to the greenhouse gas inventory. So for transportation and mobility, encourage alternate modes of transportation, expand residential opportunities for electric vehicle infrastructure. Pretty straightforward stuff. And then over here, evaluate opportunities for mixed use zoning, implement bike racks, partner with neighboring communities, just sort of straightforward strategies. We did provide a lot of feedback, so that they had more information on Milton, so that, these recommendations would apply to us more than, just your generic recommendations. Yeah. And so we have an example. Stop the share real quick of the carbon sequestration pathways. Sorry, I had it up. And so we are expecting to have this hopefully by the end of the month. As we said, we're going to meet with them next week. Sorry, I can't find it. So essentially it will break down, given when we implement certain things, it'll break down by 2030, the target emissions and how it will affect the overall GHG inventory. It's going to take it like an hour to load. So
We don't have an hour.
yeah.
Thank you.
But I did also want to share, I had some handouts of the graphics that they've been generating. I don't know if you guys want to, everyone has had a chance to see.
Yes.
Yes. So here is the logo that you guys had voted on last time. And the plan is there's, based on the 5 main categories, they'll take specific elements of this graphic and then separate them, which for governance and leadership, you can see is right here. Sorry.
should see if you can include the logo in the Milton Times article.
That would be nice.
There we go. And so this is sort of the generic logo that you're going to see for the different categories. And these can be applied to any sort of presentation, flyers, handouts. I really like it. I think it's cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so in terms of timing, then by next meeting, will we have a draft of the more quantitative, or when?
I think so. Yeah, I think they're going to be giving us deliverables by the end of next week.
Okay, great. So
So,
we'll set
yeah.
aside time at our next meeting to talk about that. And then I think we'll come back to the question of how do these things interact? Like, we're coming up with our recommendations. They're going to have a list of possible actions and the greenhouse gas implications for those actions. They may not mesh perfectly, and we'll figure out what to do about that next time. Okay. So I want to move on we have the update on the municipal opt-in stretch code, from Alex, and then we have, a report out on the material reuse forum. And then we have time for public comments, but I just want to check, do we have anybody from the public here? Okay.
We do not.
So we probably can go through those other two things and still end on time, so, great, let's do that, and, maybe Alex, you could start by giving a little bit of context. It sounds like there's been no select board request of us, so this is background information.
Can you put those slides up?
Mhm.
And a couple of these slides give that background, so I'd rather just add them up rather than flying over them. So next option, next slide here. So just a quick reminder of
Sorry.
how the building code is sort of directly implicated in Massachusetts' strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The high-level strategy is to clean the electric grid because the technology exists to generate electricity from predominantly zero carbon sources, solar, wind, nuclear, and transition end uses of fossil fuels to predominantly electric technologies. Right? So our cars become EV or bikes. We heat our homes with heat pumps, these sorts of things. And so this specialized code plays into this. We can go to the next slide. By removing barriers to electrification in the built environment for new construction. So just a little background on our options when it comes to building codes. In Massachusetts, communities have 3 model codes that they can select from. A base code, which sets minimum standards, a stretch code, which Milton has adopted. It was a prerequisite to becoming a green community in 2011. So that's the current building code in Milton. And that is updated regularly. When you opt into these model codes, you also incorporate any future changes to them as part of the article. Last year, as part of the state climate law that said net zero by 2050 as the state's goal, part of that law was to add another tier to the building code options that was more aligned with net zero goals than the current stretch code. So the state obviously recommends that all communities opt in, but it does require a town meeting vote to opt in to that top tier of climate aligned building codes. And Sustainable Milton went to the select board at their last meeting on the 11th and requested that an article be added to the May town meeting warrant to adopt a specialized code. And I think it's timely. Certainly there's a lot to learn. Nobody at Sustainable Milton was specialized code expert, but like you were saying, until it affects people, people don't really engage. So getting it at town meeting will sort of drive hopefully a robust discussion, and we'll find out what we need to know more quickly. The next slide. So this gets a little complicated because there's a lot of new stuff in the stretch code as well, because the stretch code was significantly changed in July of this year, and it will change again in January. And that's its own issue, but Milton is already on the hook for that. That's happening with or without a town meeting vote. The incremental requirements that are part of the specialized code is what's described here. So what town meeting would be signing Milton up for that's not happening by itself. Key points are that it applies only to new construction. There are elements of the stretch code which apply to large renovations. But as far as what's only in the specialized code is just for new construction. And sort of four main high-level requirements. One is pre-wiring for electrification. So if a building does use fossil fuels are not banned under this building code. That's only allowed in a small handful of pilot communities. So not happening here. But if they do use fossil fuels in the initial construction, they need to be pre-wired for solar, for heat pumps. And that does include EV charging, but that EV charging pre-wiring is actually already part of the stretch code, is my understanding. So to on-site solar, the new buildings that use fossil fuels must install a certain amount of on-site solar to offset their electricity usage. And then there are stronger energy efficiency requirements for large buildings. So single-family homes under 4,000 square feet have a higher energy efficiency standard than under the stretch code, and same with large multifamily. And again, the goal is to remove obstacles to future electrification. I can tell you, I just signed a contract to replace my fuel boiler, oil boiler with heat pumps. And boy, it's been complicated. I've been working on it since October, because my house is just not designed for that, right? We want, if somebody's gonna build, a new house in 2025, maybe they won't electrify until 2030, but it shouldn't be a nightmare for them to do, right? I've spoken to a few folks in the building trade. I mentioned John Keohane, who's a first rater, and also some developers. I think the delta between stretch code and specialized code is really pretty small in terms of construction costs, from what I'm hearing. And
That's Joe, the building inspector said that as well.
yeah, I'm
Like
trying to
pretty
get
much
this
word,
calendar.
pretty much word for word said
Yeah.
that, so.
Yeah, so I mean, there's some bigger things in the stretch code, but again, we already subject to that.
Right.
And it will, those will be offset by decreased energy costs, for many people. Next slide. Maybe in the interest of time, I can let you guys sort of get more details, from this if you're interested, and then this is more of a resource, so just adding it like a next level of detail, to what I was saying on the previous slide, but I found this view, of how the incremental requirements, stack up to be helpful. So going down, you've got all the different cases, so like homes under 4,000 square feet, all electric or mixed fuel, right? Each one of those is a different case. Larger single-family homes, large multifamily. In every case, there's a mixed fuel pathway where you are using fossil fuels. And then the cells that are highlighted in yellow are where there's a difference between the stretch code and the specialized code. So there you go. And any questions? There's no request for action from the committee now. Just wanted you to be aware that Sustainable Milton has asked the select board to take action on this. And it's probably something we should be aware of and start to develop a perspective on, because hopefully there will be engagement from residents on this, if it's coming to town meeting.
Yeah, and well, the engineering division, DPW and planning and building are all on board to do, some outreach, to have some forums, to host some, public meetings, answer any questions that, folks may have, so.
Oh, and one key thing I forgot to mention is that if it's adopted in May, it doesn't go in force for at least 6 months. So the earliest it would be in force is in January.
Yeah.
2025. So that if adopted in May, there's a training period, for the people who actually have to implement this.
Right.
So just to clarify, it's only for new buildings over 4,000 square feet?
The things that we would add by adopting the specialized code are only for new buildings. So some of these stretch code requirements apply when you do a renovation over 1,000 square feet.
Right, so
That's
that's
already. in
that's
place.
already there, right? So that's kind of my problem with that and, but I can't change it, so, so this is only for 4,000 square foot houses or 12,000 square foot multifamily.
Yeah.
And then commercial buildings of any size?
That's what's written there, yeah. So I got this
All
from a source
commercial,
too. I think.
Yeah, so all commercial buildings would be affected.
Yeah, and Josh and I had a meeting earlier today with Joe, the building commissioner, and he was very knowledgeable. And is certainly, and has said that he would commit to, you know, helping with the public forums. You know, if you have any questions for him, I could certainly get you in contact.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no contact. So Joe Prondak, our former building commissioner.
Yeah, sorry, Joe Atchu.
Yeah, so our,
Two Joes.
correct. So Joe Prondak, our former building commissioner.
Yes.
He spoke about this and he did not support it. So that's why I was calling Joe Atchu,
Mhm.
just get his, so it'd be interesting to know why the two building commissioners differ.
I think, you know, there is a cost to it, and I think there's the high level judgment is, there's some uncertainty here, but is there more uncertainty in not addressing climate change? I personally think that there is, right? We should, as a society, be prepared to accept some costs, especially relatively small ones.
Yeah, and that's the important thing, is that the stretch code that's already in place is much more comprehensive than this specialized opt-in. It's just like a little bit added on top.
Joe Prondak,
So
concerns were with the stretch code, which was coming into force automatically. And obviously I disagree with that perspective.
Right,
but,
yeah.
you know, it is true that it has some elements that will be a challenge to comply with, just like the car industry said that, you know, energy efficiency standards would be impossible when they first introduced. They figured out a way.
Yeah. And I think John Cohane, he's not in support of it either.
He's changed his mind.
Has he?
You go talk to him.
Yeah. So that's why,
Well, no, I didn't change, he had already changed his mind,
Yeah.
By, just, it was confusing, so I think
yeah,
there's
so that's, yes,
a
that's,
process that they had to go through to understand what it really had in it.
yeah, because that's like, my husband's a contractor, and, you know, right now he's, you know, he's a sub in at Harvard and they did a whole net zero, building in there, and they're running into some problems, with the building.
Yeah.
And, you know, he said it works there because, you know, their development is $50 billion, but.
Cost of money.
And they can work, they have time and money to work through the, problems. You know, he said it's the average resident probably doesn't have the time or the money to go through all it, because he said, well, what about us? Would we be able to do this? And he said, yeah, probably we wouldn't be able to afford it all. And he's a contractor. So he said it's just, you know, a concern to the average person. We're adding more of an expense. You know, everyone's talking about how, you know, Milton is so expensive as it is now, and now it's another expense, especially since a lot of our housing stock is older. As you said, your house
Yeah.
is, you know, my house is 1840, you know, so it's.
Right, well, and this does apply to new construction.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think retrofitting our existing housing stock to decarbonize it is a whole other challenge, which is also, is a huge challenge and is most of the emissions. But
Yeah.
we should at least make sure that brand new construction,
Right.
where
Yeah,
it,
I'm okay with brand new construction, and especially if I'm in a house 4,000 square feet or more.
we're not talking.
They
about
probably
where-
could afford it, so I'm not, you
Yeah.
know, it's just, but it's the commercial, we're also trying to, incentivize more
Is
commercial.
there one more slide?
I believe so.
Just to speak to the themes you're talking about, you know, there, I wanted to include, you know, at least one source that's not all positive spin on this, because, you know, it is a complicated topic. If you Google, negative press coverage of these building codes, it all cites this study, which is linked, it's independent of the government, so, you know, it takes a more like neutral view, and I'll say, I read it, it doesn't say that you know, it supports the state's climate goals, and it talks about how affordable housing and climate goals can be pursued at the same time, acknowledging that if you're not coordinated about it, there's tension between the two, right? If you only do building code changes, then housing costs do go up, and that's gonna impact low and medium income people more than rich people. But
Yes,
if
that's what I
you-
was, on the multifamily, as long as it's greater than 12,000 square foot.
Yeah.
So
Those would
we
be
could-
apartment buildings, and
Yeah.
not everybody in there is uber wealthy.
right, so that's what,
But sort of, just say the negative press coverage does cite this. I think if you read the report in its entirety, it's recommending policies to be pursued in coordination with building code changes like zoning improvements and, you know, workforce development and addressing supply chain issues to mitigate those impacts. So we shouldn't look at it in isolation.
That's just one clarifying question, if you could go back to the prior slide. Regarding single-family homes, new construction, under 4,000 square feet, it does look like if they have mixed fuels, if they include fossil fuels, there are some requirements. Am I reading that right? With the new specialized stretch code, that second row,
It adds a pre-wiring requirement.
pre-wiring requirements. So there's some,
And the on-site solar requirement.
okay,
Also, this, there's a typo on this slide. John helped me notice, so the second row, which says homes more than 4,000 square feet, that should say mixed fuel. Yeah, right there. That cell's wrong.
oh, okay, okay.
So there is a mixed fuel pathways for large, well, but actually, that's what my source that I was working from said, but John, understanding was that larger homes had to be all electric, so we were gonna go and back and double check that.
Okay, I
I
just
think that
wanted
the
to,
meta learning here is like, it's actually a little complicated, and even, you know, people in the building industry are still ironing out their understanding of the details.
okay. Great, well, thank you for the overview and for the good discussion, that's excellent. Doesn't, you know, we don't need to do anything with this right now, other than just learn about it. We may get asked about it at some point, at which point we'll come back and discuss it as a committee. Okay, the last item on our agenda is the report out on the material reuse forum. And can we just check and make sure there's no public members waiting for us?
There is not.
Okay.
I mean, I think Arthur pretty much summarized, the main initial things. But yeah, so, there have been 5, material reuse forums. Let me share this. Let me go to presentation.
The bottom ribbon,
The bottom,
yeah,
oh, right here.
yeah, it's the last one.
Okay. So there's been 5 forums, and if you guys are interested, I can share them with you. Essentially, it's about solid waste in, you know, a more stepping out of from just the GHG inventory, looking at it from a whole bunch of different angles. There's been a whole bunch of research. There still needs to be a lot more done in terms of quantifying the emissions related to solid waste. As you know, in our inventory, it's only 3%. And the estimations are just at 12 for when you look at the entire path of product.
Is it like including scope 3 emissions?
Yeah, and it's pretty it's kind of weird. Like I'll just skip around a little bit. So here is this was from the second forum on construction debris, which of course is not really incorporated in the municipality side. Here you see, oh, sorry, the left here, this is municipal solid waste. And then this is the construction and demolition debris, which is almost twice as much, which I thought was very interesting. And essentially the main message is that, all this stuff, it's not waste. There are ways you can use it, reuse it, and we just need to develop the strategies and infrastructure to do so. And so for here, this was on their presentation. The built environment generates 39% of global CO2 emissions. But as you can see, that includes the operating costs of the building. So it's kind of hard to separate out, what is actually causing the emissions, and how to target that and reduce it. So a lot more work needs to be done. In terms of this committee, skip around here. I think the most important thing would be to, engage with the public, inform them of why, this is important, educate them on the, not only the carbon emission impact of these, of the solid waste, but also the environmental impacts, the socioeconomic impacts, and financial impacts. Sorry. So I think might have left it out, but municipalities, the second or third, top most expense for municipalities is actually solid waste. So I think, working on shifting that from an expense to, generating value, and, we can do that through, developing infrastructure and policies to allow for sustainable habits. Fix-it clinics are pretty cool. Essentially just like, volunteer folks, you bring, a damaged light bulb, a broken fan, and, you bring it to the Fix-it clinic and they, volunteer and fix it. So furniture banks as well. The amount of calls that I receive for folks that are just trying to get rid of some old furniture, I'm not seeing them, but I imagine some could be, reused. People over in Mattapan, I'm sure, could use some older furniture, and also just tracking the metrics to identify the costs and savings that are associated with these items. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
So
So
where,
this is,
where would the Fix-It clinics be held? That's like,
So they were talking about doing it at the it was in they were talking about doing it at the what's the building? The
DPW or
no, the
Council on Aging.
Council on Aging, thank you. Yeah. They were talking about doing it there.
That's what it
Pretty
has
good.
to fix.
Anything, fans, air conditioners, bikes, yeah, anything, and it's volunteer based. And there's a whole network, you know, throughout Boston, of folks that have different areas of expertise that they'd, you know, be able to come and visit.
Yeah.
I've seen videos on these things and like when they fix something, they ring a bell and
Yeah,
a
it's
cheer.
kind of like a nice community
Yeah,
feeling.
Yeah,
I think it's important to tap into a sense of fun and like self-help with it around this stuff, because it's easy to fall into like, oh, you greedy American, you have too much stuff. It's like,
Mhm.
you could go that route and then people will hate you, or you could be like, hey, you know, got a lot of clutter. Like, I would like to have less clutter in my house. I'd like to throw less things away so that I waste less money. And when I can actually fix something, it makes me feel great. And I keep meaning to learn how to sew, you know, so I can fix the holes that in my elbows.
I think a lot of reuse goes on, on Central Avenue, I know. If you put anything out at the curb with a free sign on it, it's gone within hours.
There's
So
Facebook groups,
Yeah.
very active Facebook
Yeah,
groups for passing
there's,
things along.
there are lots of options. So that I think that is actually very active in Milton.
I know the college
Yeah.
lines, they call it Free Island, and parents put toys and bikes
Oh, wow.
and scooters when their kids are done, just like this little exchange, very cute.
Like, some, towns have, you know, what is it called, like a take it, leave it,
Swap it.
swap, yeah, so, you can leave something. And then, just like you said, but it's on a townwide, like every Saturday or once a month. And so
Yeah.
then, come in, and if you see something you like, you know, it's what the old dump used to be, used to walk through and find something and take it on.
I think Ian Gregorio was planning like a trunk, townwide trunk swap or something like that, that people seem to get excited about, and, I don't know, maybe with a little support, something like that could be built into a really fun community event.
And I like the idea of the fix it, because a lot of people now, they don't know how to do anything. You know, and for better or worse, my husband knows how to do a lot, some stuff, but same old thing, which maybe I want something new. But, you know, I think people want to learn how to do, like, fix a lamp, you know?
Well, there's the whole like makerspace movement.
Yes,
too,
yeah.
Which is kind of an offshoot, I think.
Yeah. And that's happening in college. They have college spaces. have
And there's
makerspace.
I mean, we have generational timescales here, so
Yeah,
it's also an opportunity to engage youth. And like, my generation kind of recycles habitually, because in the nineties, people like us were trying to get everybody to recycle, right? And if we are start focusing on, say, composting now in the schools, so it becomes a habit, then when these kids are grown up, composting will be solved, right?
Are there other recycle center or reuse centers? I know the one in Boston, because I both donate to it as well as buy things there. The one near Mission Hill. Are there others around?
yeah, there's a lot. There's not much in Milton. So I think that would be something that, you know, maybe we could assist in, is the outreach of, you know, letting people know where these places exist, and how you can take advantage of them. I think the closest Goodwill is right over in Mattapan.
As far as the, sorry, go ahead.
No, I've always used the one in Boston, and it's very active, and because I both donated and purchased there. I get an annual report on it, and the amount of construction materials turnover there is tremendous.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Habitat for Humanity has their rehome, I think they call it, in Dedham. So like like salvage stuff, if you're redoing your kitchen, but your cabinets are okay, you can donate them.
I want to just do a time check. We're about 5 minutes after. I don't want to keep people, though. This is a great conversation. I love it. And I love the community building aspect of this. I think that's really exciting. And I think the more we can integrate that into everything that we're talking about, the more people might adopt our recommendation. So, but would anyone like to move to adjourn the meeting? Second? All in favor? All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Really glad you could come.